Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, I guess, if you're logging on from the West Coast today. For those I have not met, my name is Jack Porter. I'm our Program Director for Workforce Development and Economic Policy here at the National Governors Association. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar on entrepreneurship. Supporting residents' ability to start and grow new businesses is a top priority for governors across all 55 states, commonwealths, and territories. And so I'm very excited for today's discussion. Before we dive right in, I just want to quickly preview today's agenda. Go ahead and go to the next slide here. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Victor Huang, who is the founder and CEO of Right to Start, a group that is actively working on knocking down the all too common barriers that entrepreneurs face today when they're starting and growing their businesses. After Victor and his team provide us with a national landscape and an overview of their efforts, we'll hear from 2 states about their strategies to bolster entrepreneurs. First, we'll hear from Governor Shapiro's team in Pennsylvania, which recently published their Commonwealth's long-term economic development plan. And to round us out, we'll hear from Governor Lombardo's team in Nevada, who will discuss their strategy for supporting entrepreneurs, including their efforts to implement a first-in-the-nation right to start law. So without any further ado, again, I want to thank you all for being on the line with us today. And I'll now turn it over to Victor Huang, founder and CEO of Right to Start. Please take it away, Victor.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, everybody who's joined. I'm pleased here to talk about Right to Start and our work in helping grow economic prosperity through stronger policies for entrepreneurs all across the country. Our work is around lifting and connecting the grassroots up to the grass tops to increase entrepreneurial opportunity for everybody. And so we've been doing some, we launched just about 4 years ago or so, and we've been making some significant headway in reforming policies to make them better for entrepreneurs. And we're here to share some thoughts with you and lessons learned and ideas that you might be able to take away back into your own work. On the next slide. So you can see that entrepreneurial opportunity grows prosperity for everybody. And it does that in a bunch of ways that often aren't fully recognized. We know entrepreneurship, and there's a bunch of research now that shows this. It creates more homegrown jobs. And I'll have another chart about that later. It actually increases productivity. We know this is where production comes from, GDP comes from entrepreneurs. We know it lowers inequality. The more entrepreneurship you have, the less inequality you have. It raises incomes. For every entrepreneurial 1% increase in a county, it raises household incomes by, on average, almost $500. And it also increases lifetime incomes. It grows community wealth, and it also fights poverty. There's a data statistic right there. For every 1% increase in the entrepreneurship rate in a state, the poverty rate decreases by 2%. So we know entrepreneurship has this broad-based impact, and it affects everybody. Here's photos of road trips I've taken across the country, meeting with entrepreneurs of all kinds. And I can tell you the impact of entrepreneurs, an entrepreneurship policy and making it easier to start and grow businesses has a huge ripple effect all across many, many communities. On the next slide, you can see the challenge we're facing, which is that the voices of everyday entrepreneurs are left out of America's policymaking. So even though we know how important entrepreneurship is, we actually don't hear from the entrepreneurs. And the reason is it's actually kind of a flaw in the American system, which is the people who are hustling the hardest have the least time and energy and money to be involved in the system and to have their voices heard. So we have to do something to actually lift their voices up and actually make sure that everyday entrepreneurs actually get heard in American policymaking. And so our vision at Right to Start is a world where everyone can realize their fundamental right to entrepreneurial opportunity. And we actually think of it as a fundamental right, just like your right to speech or your right to worship. You have a right to start. You have a right to have a level playing field when it comes to being able to be an entrepreneur, to start and build your own enterprise, whether that's a garage, kitchen, or bedroom business, or it's a massive tech startup. It's whatever you have, whatever you want to be able to build, you should be able to have an equal access to be able to do that. Our mission at Right to Start then is to drive civic change to eliminate barriers for everyone's right to start so that everyone gets an equal shot to build and pursue their own version of the American dream. Our approach at Right to Start around lifting the voices of entrepreneurs from the grassroots to the grass tops is 3 parts to it. One, we change communities. 2, we change minds. And 3, we change policies. The change communities piece is about mobilizing citizens to take actions that expand entrepreneurial opportunity. Change minds piece is about elevating the importance of entrepreneurial opportunity through media and storytelling. And the third part around policy work is advocating for entrepreneurs with policymakers and civic leaders at all levels. So we actually work with policymakers and governors' offices and state legislators and city councils and congresspeople and executive branch folks at every level of government to be able to provide support and information and resources to help you make better policies for entrepreneurs. And so the movement has been building nationwide, and you can see this is just March of 2024. Our footprint now spans 24 states and DC. And we've got a network of grassroots people from our ambassadors and our advocates on the ground to local media that we've been working with, to Right to Start Acts introduced, which my colleague will be talking about more, state legislation that we've been able to get introduced all across the country. And so we do span really coast to coast right now in the impact we've made. So why entrepreneurs matter? And so this is a question that's worth asking, because it's not something that people have kind of general thoughts on it, but they don't have specific thoughts on it. But I wanted to share some important data with you. So one, we took a poll recently. This is a bipartisan national voter poll with 2 of the top pollsters in the country. And we found that this is one issue in a time of great political polarization. This is one issue that really unites people together. So 94% of Americans agree that it's important to America's future that citizens have a fair opportunity to start and grow their own businesses. Almost no issue really gets this kind of unanimity today. Entrepreneurship really is a uniting force. It's a uniting issue. It actually can really pull people together in a way that very few issues can do. And you can see it cuts across party lines. So it's actually a very powerful issue that resonates deeply. It's sort of core in the American DNA. But this chart's really important because what we know, and this is almost 2 decades of research, that new businesses create almost all net job growth. And so if you look at this chart, almost 2 decades, that blue line at the top are businesses younger than 5 years. That is the new entrepreneurial firms. And the red line and the gray lines are older firms, over 5 to 9 years or 10 plus years old. And you can find that the oldest firms actually shed jobs in the tough times. That gray line actually dips down during recessions. So they shed jobs, but they don't necessarily bring them back again. The blue lines, the young dynamic businesses, are actually net job creation firms throughout the entire period of measurement. It's actually the new firms that are creating the new jobs in the economy. So when we talk about creating new jobs, we really should be talking about how are we supporting entrepreneurial activity, because they are the source of net new jobs, not the old firms and not the firms that have been around for a while. But in our poll, we found that only 18% of voters know this. So people don't really know this, but this is important to let people know that if you want jobs, you have to think about creating new firms. So now the bad news about entrepreneurship. So 81% of entrepreneurs, this is a Kauffman Foundation survey. So I used to run the entrepreneurship department at the Kauffman Foundation. 81% of entrepreneurs say government favors big businesses over them. There's a real sense among entrepreneurs that it's not a level playing field. 69% of entrepreneurs say government doesn't care about them. And 41% of Americans would start their dream business in 6 months if they could, but only 2% of them actually do. And so we know there's this huge gap between Americans and their entrepreneurial aspirations, their desire to build their dreams, and what they actually do in reality. And so we need to find ways to correct that. And so this is from our poll as well. If you actually look at the data, it shows that there are over 15 million Americans that didn't start a new business, in part just because of government fees and or red tape alone. Those are self-driven errors that we can actually fix. And in fact, half of all people who considered starting a business didn't do so because of these reasons. 76% said it was insufficient capital, 53% couldn't afford government fees, 49% said it was confusing government requirements and forms, 48% said it was the fear of losing healthcare, 34% couldn't get the right training or information, 32% said government services were poor, 30% said government approvals were too slow, and 15% were held back by non-compete agreements, that is, agreements by their old employers that kept them from starting a business in that sector. And so you can see there's a multiplicity of factors. So when people say, what's the one thing that can drive entrepreneurship? It's not one thing, it's actually a bunch of things. And these are all things that policy can address that have stood in the way of people actually starting new businesses. And so when we've seen these barriers get tackled, you can actually see data that shows that entrepreneurship actually starts to address it. People actually start to more businesses when they know that they can tackle these things more easily. But we can break those barriers. Those barriers are not artificial. They're not made by aliens from outer space. They're made by us. And so we can actually make it better for entrepreneurs and make it easier for them to start and grow businesses. So through our work, we've learned that you can actually do a lot. So we support policymakers and civic leaders, which has led to bipartisan change. Photos of us working with the Nevada Assembly, with the Kansas legislature, with local grassroots work in Arkansas is just examples of the work we've done across the country. We work with communities at the grassroots to advocate for entrepreneurs. So these are 10 of the advocates we've had. These are grassroots people working with entrepreneurs, hearing the barriers they deal with, and also lifting them up and putting together meetings between entrepreneurs and civic leaders, political leaders, to hear the issues that they're dealing with and to raise them and have them addressed. And then we drive citizen education and engagement to encourage policy change. You can see petition drives, we do meetups, we do public events, we do summits, other forms of citizen awareness and activation. So people become aware of these issues. And so there's a better channel between the entrepreneurs who have so little time to get involved and have their voices heard, and that the policymakers and civic leaders can hear them and find ways to make the environment better for them, because we know how important entrepreneurs are. And we do work in media. So we lift the voices of entrepreneurs through local, state, and national media. I write regularly with national publications like Inc. magazine, but what's actually even more interesting with our work is we do local media work. We take the entrepreneurs in their communities, we hear the issues they're dealing with, and we help them craft and place op-eds so people can hear what they're dealing with and can talk about the issues that matter to them. And so these barriers that entrepreneurs deal with that are often never heard actually get exposed and lifted up, and people can actually take action. So we had 85 stories cover us last year in 16 states, and we're continuing to expand that work. So really all of it adds up to this core question is, can we create a world with zero barriers between people and their own version of the American dream? And entrepreneurs, if you look at the data, come from all walks of life. They come from all age groups. They come from all socioeconomic groups and all racial groups. Entrepreneurs really are the lifeblood of the economy. And when we think of entrepreneurs, we really should be thinking about the American citizenry as a whole, because every American really harbors that deep DNA to start and build their own entrepreneurial dreams, and we should be in the business of supporting that. And so I'm going to thank you for listening to my part, and I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Jason Grill, who is our Chief Government Affairs Officer, who can talk more specifically about the work we're doing at the state level and how we're actually driving change in different states.
Thank you, Victor. Next slide, please. So this is me, Jason Grill. I'm a Chief Government Affairs Officer, Right to Start. I've been an entrepreneur. I've also been a policymaker. I was a former Missouri legislator and have worked in various capacities with public policy and government affairs throughout my career. I've also started my own businesses, so I've seen kind of what it's like to run and start your own company. I've also exited one too. So next slide. Victor talked a lot about a poll, and Americans favor pro-entrepreneurial policies. We did this poll, and I can share this with you, or you can go to our link at righttostart.org/poll. We mentioned, again, two of the top pollsters on both sides of the aisles did this. And if you look at this, I know it's small, but I will say that every single one of our field guide policy ideas is either strongly supported or somewhat supported by a majority of Republican, Independent, and Democrats on all the issues listed, from economic development to tax relief, capital access, red tape reform, non-compete reform. The list goes on and on. You can see it there. These are issues that unite politicians, and they unite citizens. But unfortunately, as we've talked about, they haven't been embraced, or they haven't been pushed as much until Right to Start came about. So I'd love to share more results from our poll at righttostart.org/poll if you need them, or you can connect with me after the webinar. Next slide. One of the questions we asked, and I think it's important to point out, is that we asked all three of those partisan groups in the poll if they'd be more than likely to support a policymaker or executive who emphasized making it easier to start and grow a business. And as you can see in the data, over 62% of all people and parties represented said yes, 59% more likely on the Republican end, 64% independent end, and 62% Democrat. And so talking about entrepreneurship and making it easier for all entrepreneurs and all people to start and grow a new business is something that it spans party lines, it spans across the aisle, and it's a winning issue for folks. Next slide. We went through this slide earlier. I just wanted to mention it again, that we are actively engaged throughout the country with not only policymakers, but also executive level departments such as yours, Department of Commerce's economic development departments, governor's offices, so forth and so on. Next slide. So while we have many ideas, which we'll share here in a little bit, one of the first things we start with in a state is on a typical Right to Start Act, and this has been approved by the Council of State Governments as shared state legislation as of 2023. The Nevada Right to Start Act was approved. Do you actually have an Office of Entrepreneurship in your state? Do you actually have someone who is fighting and the liaison for entrepreneurs on a day-to-day basis? They eat, sleep, and breathe entrepreneurship issues and new and young company issues in your state. You'll find that most states don't have this, and if they do, they're not doing all the things that entrepreneurs actually want in their state. So again, dedicated liaison for entrepreneurs, at least one person doing that. Coordinating policies affecting entrepreneurs. So you're kind of the support system for entrepreneurs in the state. You're listening to them, you're learning from them, you're finding out which policies affect them and how you can actually implement change to make their lives better. You're working to cut red tape. They're streamlining government processes for entrepreneurs. They're expanding access to government contracts. This is a huge one, which we'll get into more. But just allocating 5% of government contracts to new and young companies under 5 years old could just change the livelihood of these businesses in your state. But most importantly, too, they're tracking the data on entrepreneurship that affects entrepreneurship, and they're tracking government contracts. Most states don't do this effectively. And I think it's something that most people would agree that they'd like to know. They'd like to know how many new businesses actually are engaged in government and how entrepreneurship is doing in their state. And finally, publishing an annual State of Entrepreneurship report that can be released to the legislature and those making policies of what's working, what's not working, and what they should do moving forward is something that the Office of Entrepreneurship should undertake. The next slide. And so I wanted to point out Nevada, which we will learn from later in the call, the great work they're doing, but really a pioneer on Right to Start Act and Right to Start legislation. And again, it was a bipartisan bill. It was actually sponsored by the Speaker of the House, who's a Democrat, and it was signed by the Governor Lombardo, who is a Republican. Steve Yeager was the sponsor in the House. And it did all the things that we just mentioned. It really truly was the first of its kind bill to really coordinate entrepreneurship policy making, streamline processes, make government contracts more accessible and track them, and really work with the community in the state of Nevada and all the different areas to learn from entrepreneurs on how they can increase entrepreneurship as a great form of economic development in the state. We also worked in New Mexico, and that was a state where the Right to Start Act, which created the Office of Entrepreneurship, passed in both houses of the legislature. It was then actually utilized by the governor and her office to inspire an Office of Entrepreneurship there. So they have two FTEs working there on entrepreneurship, and we're very excited to learn and work with them to try to make sure that they're doing all the right things on entrepreneurship in their state. So a Democratic governor state, we just pointed out a Republican governor state. Again, these issues are uniformly supported by both parties. So it's very exciting to see what's happening in New Mexico. I will point out, too, that we had impact in Kansas. The Right to Start Act there inspired a debate around what the state was doing around entrepreneurship. We not only testified at a committee hearing on behalf of entrepreneurs, we also were a part of an all-day hearing in an interim committee on entrepreneurship in the state. And I'm more than happy to announce that the state of Kansas, the Department of Commerce, is currently in a hiring process for their Director of Small Business and Entrepreneurship position in the Department of Commerce in Kansas. Very exciting as someone who lives in the Midwest to see that a Midwestern state is moving forward and trying to really capitalize on entrepreneurship in their state. We have a ton of policy recommendations that aren't just the Office of Entrepreneurship at righttostart.org, including our field guide. Some of them real briefly. We talked about 5% of government contracts. We talked about we're trying to do more for economic development and workforce development through allocating more funds in those buckets to entrepreneurs and new and young companies. We all support at Right to Start reducing licensing barriers and creating zero barriers to start through reducing registration fees for new and young companies. Maybe you could even do a stepladder approach where a first-year business doesn't have to pay a registration cost, but maybe in their second, third, fourth year, when they have actual funds to fund their businesses, they can actually submit that filing fee to the state. States such as California and Colorado have removed the first-year filing fee over the last few years, and we're working to see that happen in more and more states. non-compete reform. We also believe in healthcare mobility, finding ways that entrepreneurs can start and grow their business while they're transitioning between jobs. And of course, early tax hassles. If you're not making any money on your business, we believe that you should have a deferment of your taxes up to a later date if you are putting that money back into the business. So all these ideas are at righttostart.org. Victor mentioned our breadth of the country of where we're engaged, and I'll finish here quickly. Sally, we have had Right to Start Acts introduced and have moved and actually passed in the House or the Senate in all these states, 15 state legislatures. Over 40 pieces of legislation introduced. As I mentioned, the Office of Entrepreneurship in Nevada and their Right to Start Act was the first. But we're actively engaged in educating policymakers in all these different states. And some, as I mentioned, have passed, and whether it's a House or a Senate. In Missouri, for instance, my home state, which I love, it's passed in the House and in the Senate, but in different versions of the bill. So as always in those states, you have to kind of move each and every year with sessions happening each and every year. We are having an impact throughout the country. This is me and some of my colleagues at different state capitals. We are very excited by this work. It really, truly is a blessing, and to be working on entrepreneurship and policy at the same time, it is bringing people together. So we're very excited about that. I will say before I close and hand it back over to Sally, we would be more than happy to work with you in your offices and talk to you further about these policies. You know, if it's possible to do some of these things with budgets you already have or within your offices or your departments, we'd love to do it that way too, not just always the policy-making legislative way, but working with executive level branch folks and policymakers is something we do as well. And I want to turn it back over to Sally to get to our next speaker. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Jason. I hope everybody can hear me. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you, great. I just got one here in my office. I'm Sally Rood with the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. And as many of you know, I work on economic development policies here in the center. And I'm just so pleased to see this webinar happening, and we're honored to have Victor and Jason talk about their work with Right to Start, which what they've been doing is just amazing in a short amount of time. And I have the privilege and the honor of being able to introduce our state folks, our state speakers here on this webinar. And we are going to start with the Pennsylvania approach. Steve DeTore, and I don't see Steve on my screen, but I hope he will be off screen, there he is. Okay, great. Hi, Steve. Steve DeTore is Executive Deputy Secretary of Policy and Planning in the Office of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. So I'm just going to turn it right over to Steve at this moment. So Steve, are you ready to take it away?
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, everybody. As Sally said, my name is Steve DeTore, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Deputy Secretary for Policy and Planning in the Office of Governor Josh Shapiro here in Pennsylvania. So as part of the governor's fiscal year 24-25 budget proposal, he laid out an economic development strategy, which is the first of its kind here in Pennsylvania in over 20 years. That budget calls for $600 million in total new and expanded investments, primarily through Pennsylvania's Department of Community and Economic Development, which is nice to see some colleagues from on this call. And they will help implement this strategy, increase Pennsylvania's competitiveness, and deliver real economic growth for the Commonwealth. These investments include $500 million in the Pennsylvania Strategic Investments and to enhance sites, also known as PA sites, funding that will help bring more commercial and industrial sites online and ensure companies have options for attractive business environments where they can move quickly and thrive here in Pennsylvania. An additional $25 million is proposed for what is called the Main Street Matters program. That will support entrepreneurs, small businesses, and commercial corridors that are the backbones of our communities across Pennsylvania. $3.5 million to create and launch the Pennsylvania Regional Economic Competitiveness Challenge, and that will incentivize regional growth, build vibrant and resilient regions, and support communities by investing in the development of comprehensive strategies to propel entire regions forward. This strategy will lead to more competitive and prosperous, a more competitive and prosperous Pennsylvania, where innovators become entrepreneurs and new discoveries enable our people and companies to succeed. We will build upon our strength in research and development by investing in cutting-edge companies and commercializing new and emerging innovations and promoting innovation as a job creator across all regions of the Commonwealth. That's why the economic development strategy, in addition to the investments I've already mentioned, accelerates those in the entrepreneurial ecosystems through $20 million to form the first of its kind Pennsylvania Innovation Fund. Among other initiatives, this fund will launch the Pennsylvania Problem Solvers Startup Competition that will seek to find entrepreneurial solutions to our pressing challenges. The Shapiro administration's new economic development strategy in the lens of startups and entrepreneurs aims to increase the total number of startups and high growth industries by 1,100 over the next 10 years, which will bring our share of startups from 6.6% to 10% in these industries and becoming a leader among our peer states for entrepreneurial growth. I'd like to also highlight another effort around making Pennsylvania more competitive, and that is the creation of the Office of Transformation and Opportunity, which was done so by executive order on January 24th, 2023, within the first week of Governor Shapiro's term. It was one of his first acts as governor, and its goal is to fuel Pennsylvania's economic growth by making the Commonwealth friendly to new and existing businesses. So this is kind of a theme here between the economic development strategy and the Office of Transformation and Opportunity. The OTO, that's how it's referred to here, works towards this mission by trying to tackle some of the issues that Victor mentioned in his remarks and Jason highlighted in his slides, such as cutting red tape and providing immediate support to businesses on issues ranging from permitting to business registration, as well as pushing forward structural reforms that drive economic development by making Pennsylvania more business friendly. The OTO is helping to create a strong economic community within Pennsylvania, one that works for large companies looking to relocate, but also the one-person entrepreneur who is just trying to get started. Fostering that community support is vital to the future of our economy and will play a significant role in how businesses of all sizes see Pennsylvania as a place to do business. As we all know from reading the 2019 NGA report on entrepreneurship, community is at the top of the list for what entrepreneurs see as what entrepreneurs see as being most important to them in the success of their business. Governor Shapiro recognizes this and has developed an economic strategy that reflects it. So with that, thank you very much. I'd like to turn it back to Sally.
Sally, you're muted.
Sally, you're muted.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Steve. Great presentation. I'm going to put a link to that entrepreneurship report in the chat in just a second. But now it's my definite pleasure to be introducing our Nevada speakers. We have Karsten Heiss, Director of Strategic Programs and Innovation in the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development, or GOED. And we also have Kaima Pert, who's the Director of the Office of Entrepreneurship in the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development, or GOED. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Karsten first, and I don't see him. Now I do. Karsten, are you ready to take it away?
I'm right here, Sally. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having Nevada on this call. Next slide, please, starting with this one. So I'm trying to be brief if I can, and then really leave the honor to my colleague, Kaima. As you already mentioned, she is the director for the newly established Office of Entrepreneurship. And but let me sort of briefly make a few remarks to put the office into context of our economic development strategy. As Sally has correctly alluded to, this sits within the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and we are spearheading Nevada's economic development strategy. So as my colleague, Jason Grill just mentioned in his remarks, the office was just recently established. In 2023, the Nevada legislative session under Assembly Bill 77 passed this bill. Now, we are one of those states that meets only every 2 years. So this is actually we can say a milestone. So hadn't we not passed this, we would have had to wait another 2 years, and with elections happening in the meantime. And the bill was signed into law by Governor Lombardo in July. And as Jason correctly mentioned, this was not a bill that was put forward by our agency, but it was spearheaded by the Speaker. And at the same time, when we were leading up to working with the Speaker, we meaning really Jason and Victor's team with the folks here on the ground, Nevada had an election. So Governor Lombardo was elected in November of 22, and then came into office as the legislative session started. And Governor Lombardo was very clear in the State of the State address in January of 23, where he basically put forward Nevada should be the most entrepreneurial friendly state in the nation. So passing this bill really fitted his priorities of his incoming administration. And I put some references here on the slide that refer to the governor's 3-year plan and policy matrix. And it also fits into GOED's comprehensive economic development strategy, or short sets for this. GOED has been really putting state plans, strategic plans forward on a regular basis ever since the office was founded in 2011. And the most recent is the March 23 sets, which are referenced on this slide. And here we are really looking at further diversifying the economy, positioning our state as electric, innovative, and connected. That is the future of Nevada. So this is where the Entrepreneurship Office would sit. So let me, before I hand it over to Kaima, just make that point a little bit clearer. So the Office of Entrepreneurship is not a standalone entity. It is embedded in our, what we call, Innovation-Based Economic Development Division, or IBED, that's our strategy. And we can go into this in more detail during Q&A. So why did we do that? So there are really sort of two reasons for this. The first one is, so going a little bit to theory. So if you define entrepreneurship according to what Howard Stevenson put forward as the pursuit of opportunity beyond resources controlled, if you take that definition, then the office and its services that it provides will really benefit from such an embeddedness with respect to additional opportunities and resources which can be made accessible to entrepreneurs, or it makes it at least easier the path to these resources. And secondly, the second reason, this is more Nevada specific. We have traditionally suffered from a sort of narrow, which we call transactional approach when we're dealing with new initiatives in Nevada. And approaching the office in context of innovation-based economic development is really breaking through these, unfortunately, transactional traditions that we have towards a more holistic strategy. And that also informed us when we hired the director for the office, when we hired Kaima. She started in October, and she has a multi-year background in both innovation research and commercialization, and technology strategy. So there is this background which ties to innovation-based economic development. And also where she came from the University of Nevada, Reno, more specifically from the Nevada Center for Applied Research. And that center was created by the Nevada Knowledge Fund, which is a instrument that we have at our disposal within our IBED division as a major instrument. And we have been supporting this. We created that entity and have been supporting it ever since. And Kaima came from that entity. So with that, I would like to hand it over to my colleague Kaima Pert. Please, Kaima, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carson. And if I may, the next slide. So what you've heard really from Right to Start is the US opportunity, and what you've heard from Carson regarding Nevada is our ability to leverage that opportunity stateside. And so really, as Carson had mentioned, we take a fairly high-level theoretical approach. One of the things we wanted to be certain of is that we leverage the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants. And that includes states in our midst, like Pennsylvania, doing fantastic work, but also the likes, for example, of Indiana, who are similarly leveraging some of these opportunities for their innovative frontier. Here I've provided a couple of quotes, some of which exist as the resources on the Right to Start website, which I believe Sally put in the chat. And it's a phenomenal reality that we're surprised to find that the US's level of entrepreneurship, and that is in the form of startup rates, has been going down for the last decades. And yet we have really before us the lever to pull to create greater economic prosperity and diversity among our local economies. And obviously, local scales up to regional, scales up to state productivity. And we've never seen globally any country that had a high level of entrepreneurship, but a low level of economic growth. So these are obviously connected and really point us in the right direction. Next slide, please. In the case of Nevada, and you've heard a little how the Governor's Office of Economic Development has structured itself, in addition to the IBED and Office of Entrepreneurship, we have other existing agencies that have been lending their efforts to supporting the attraction of businesses interstate, and that's leveraging Nevada's assets for greater productivity for businesses that would come to Nevada. But then we also have the opportunity to grow and retain those existing businesses. So we have government contract assistance, we've got small business certification, we have targeted workforce training in industries that are focused for sector development, as well as CDBG that also supports Main Street initiatives within the state. And not only within the Governor's Office of Economic Development, but also the Governor's other state offices, including the Lieutenant Governor's Small Business Advocacy Group, the Secretary of State's Silver Flume Licensing Arena, and our Department of Employment and Training, who does workforce development at large. So all of these have operated previously to attract and support business retention. And so what we're seeing now is an opportunity created by AB 77 that established the Office of Entrepreneurship as a dedicated effort to take those initial industry and emerging opportunities into small business starts and growth. And you heard from Right to Start, and obviously we echo their sentiment that this ensures economic diversification and lasting jobs, with a view to access by all Nevadans and fundamentally all Americans. It creates for everybody the foundation for higher lifetime earnings, improved poverty outcomes, and truly the individual realization of those entrepreneurial dreams. Next slide, please. Within Nevada, we've had a focus traditionally on industries of leisure, hospitality, and mining. You heard that our economic development strategy has now been reset with an electric, innovative, and connected future that leverages our past successes, but also brings us into a future that leverages future opportunities, such as lithium mining, as it's supported by recent gains with NSF supported engines and tech hubs. Nevada was one of only 31 who received that opportunity, which Carson's office worked to submit just last month. However, there's also statewide barriers that we're trying to dismantle. One of those initiated by the governor's executive order to review regulatory hurdles created the chance to dig a little deeper into those business licensing, occupational licensing, and other regulatory frameworks that stand in the way of business formation and growth. And so that's something that we're supporting statewide in this coming year. In addition, Nevada has typically been underrepresented in some of the national catalogs, and I've created a opportunity to review the MIT graphic here, where we're seeing a lot of activity across the country. In this instance, in the case of business registrations, the question we had as a state was whether or not the activity was happening and we weren't measuring it, or were we measuring something that wasn't necessarily indicative of what we know is the small business activity across the state. And so we're going to be taking this chance to review statewide data and create a dashboard that will be accessible to all as in part a benchmarking against other state activities to give ourselves a sense of accomplishment or highlight areas of focus, and also something that can be used locally to demonstrate progress toward aspirational targets by regional communities. Next slide, please. As a result of the, next slide, please. Oh, thank you. No, I apologize. It just took a moment to come through on my side. Thanks, Matt. As a result of the AB 77 action and our consultation across those agencies, as well as local communities of entrepreneurial support organizations, we've set our vision in alignment with obviously the right to start and realize entrepreneurial dreams for every Nevadan, but also making it very clear that the two mechanisms by which we are going to help realize that is by increasing entrepreneurial opportunities and reducing barriers to business starts and growth. And so in order to personalize that or individualize that according to what we call the Nevada way, and that's something that really says that we don't give up and we don't give in, and we battle on. Hence, often our cry is the one that is battle born. We set to undertake a three-phased approach in the first year of the Entrepreneurship Office. And as Carson had mentioned, I bring really a wide interdisciplinary or multi-sector approach. I also bring an international standpoint, having done studies and employment in Australia and Canada, as well as California and abroad. And so we're using a very rigorous framework to consult with our communities and ensure that they have a clear trajectory to entrepreneurial growth at the regional level. And then at the statewide level, that we're able to capture appropriate indicators and roll that up for their reflection and benefit. Ultimately, however, it was the desire of the legislature that we should ensure that all of these operators can take effect in communities that have been historically underserved. So we're highlighting a review of some of those minority groups, which include African American, Hispanic, veteran, and women-owned businesses, but also expanding that to those who might be able to take advantage of the resources and assets available, but may not know how to access them. And so that includes tribal communities that perhaps haven't had a strong entrepreneurial bent, or newcoming immigrants and seniors, in fact, who often have resources and time and a new lease on life upon retirement. All of this is to say that we're working as well to ensure that we're inclusive across the 5 stakeholders established by MIT. And we ensure that each of those stakeholders that you see on the graphic there, so the entrepreneurs themselves, as well as the investors, established businesses, the government agencies, and the university system, are active and contributing players to a healthy Nevada entrepreneurial ecosystem. Next slide, please. In circling back and making sure that this takes traction, our community consultation engaged a significant number of communities that had already participated in the Main Street efforts. So kudos to Pennsylvania for ensuring that those are leveraged for their outcomes. It's a wonderful touch point. We also have urban startup weeks, which had taken place in the North and South. And we work with our 8 regional development authorities across the state to ensure engagement. We brought national experts in, and they're specifically experienced in collaborative consensus building. We held 7 statewide consultations, including the opportunity for feedback. And I wanted to share here, for the benefit of the NGA participants, what our initial findings were. And most of these were really echoed both regionally in the urban environment and regionally across our statewide rural communities. Obviously, there's an emphasis on community and infrastructure supports that are of greater need in the rurals, and so that's an understandable highlight. But otherwise, these were almost easy consensus items to grab and lay hold of. We haven't yet had the opportunity to interpret that for effect, but we will be going back out to our communities and leveraging the input that they already provided to ensure that this has tractable next steps. And so next slide, please. I provide here, and more for reference rather than to go through in detail, because I know we're short on time. The slides will be made available to the participants after the fact, as well as the recording, I understand. And so here we have examples of where we've identified regional issues, and those are then converted into goals, which the communities themselves had broken down into priorities. And in this way, we ladder those priorities up through the goals to address the issues that each of the communities had identified. Next slide, please. When we go back to the communities, and this is a fairly busy slide, but I do want to rest here as my closing point. We've had very active engagement with each of those communities where they themselves articulated their SMART goals and developed their strategic pathways. Where important resources are available, we've identified those for leveraging, and we've also considered what assets might be missing. And so our next step in closing our community consultation, and before we go ahead into our data assessment and beyond that to look at historically underserved communities, is really to take our entrepreneurship office role seriously as coordinators of entrepreneurial training, support, resource access, and as I mentioned, data capture. It's important that the IBED framework is acknowledged at this point in time, because we're finding that the established risk capital and finance mechanisms aren't necessarily appreciated by the full community audience, and they don't necessarily have a full understanding of the way in which universities can support commercialization through innovation to business setup. And so one of the real advantages that Nevada has in coordinating around industry focus areas is that those tech-based strategic initiatives that are being implemented under IBED give us even bigger levers to pull, if you will, and a better framework, such as Pennsylvania is exploring, to ground our innovation in a commercial pipeline to establish small business. And through those small business establishments, we end up with economic diversification. The Office of Entrepreneurship has a key role to play in coordinating and collating those resources. And then through the databases that we're setting up, those industry indicators become signs of success. That's very much the active process of the Entrepreneurship Office. And if there's any other inquiries, you have our information there, and Sally will be providing it after the fact. Thank you so much, Sally.
Well, thank you, Kaima and Karsten and Steve before you. Really delighted to have Pennsylvania and Nevada on this event today. I'm looking to see if we have any questions from the audience, and I'm not able to see any raised hands here. So I would request that the audience please, if you have questions, to put them in the chat box and address them to everyone, if possible. So it's difficult for me to see raised hands because I'm only seeing the persons who are pinned to this screen here. So let me just go ahead and start with a couple of questions for our speakers, and maybe some folks will chime in with their questions in just a moment. I know it takes a minute to digest so much wonderful information. So I will start with so many questions in my mind. I'm not even sure where to start. I've been taking notes, and hopefully our summary commentary on this event will be helpful as well. And yes, Kaima, you were correct. We will be posting, this is for the audience's sake, we will be posting the recording of this event and the slides hopefully very, very soon, along with a summary commentary. And I will send out an email to the registrants to let them know when that's posted. So let me start with a question for Jason Grill, if I might. Jason, the question is, how are you seeing states apply the steps that you outlined in the state field guide to their individual policy climate and to best suit their state? I assume it's sort of a pick and choose.
Right. And that's a great question, Sally. And when we started this, we were a startup, and Victor will allude to this, where, you know, we were just happy to talk to anyone that would listen about entrepreneurship. And, you know, we had 12 to 15 ideas, and we would just talk through all of them. And then our first legislator, who actually followed Kauffman Foundation's work and Victor's work, picked 4 of them, and he ran with those. But now, obviously, we have more model policy, and we have enough data, and we've worked with enough states to kind of know what they're capturing and what they can get accomplished. And frankly, a lot of states are looking at the things that I talked about, having, you know, a director of entrepreneurship, a direct liaison for entrepreneur, something that most states don't have. And if they do have, they're not doing all the things that entrepreneurs need and want them to do. Another thing that states are really working on in their states is trying to figure out how they can engage more new and young companies for government contracts. We advocate for 5% of them to go to new and young companies, whether that's an encouragement or a requirement, and also to track those government contracts for new and young companies. I think that would be something that a state really could easily do on their website or through their administration. So that's another thing that they've really jumped up and leaped up to try to do. And then trying to figure out the filing fees that I mentioned is another thing. You know, it's hard, obviously, for government sometimes to give back revenue. However, we believe that when a company's just starting, they need that revenue and that money in order to hire folks, to get customers, to advance their business. And I think that's another thing that states can grasp, that hopefully over time they will begin to cut first-year filing fees for new and young companies. The last thing I'll mention too that I think really has resonated with a lot of states is, and you're seeing it through executive orders, through governors, as we've talked about. I know the Michigan governor has done this as well, to really kind of evaluate and look through all the different permitting and licensing rules in each state, all the fees that entrepreneurs have to pay as they start, what issues are burdensome, and where can they actually evaluate those on a 3 to 5 year basis to try to get rid of burdensome regulations and costs for young companies. And we find that this is something that hopefully every governor or state will do at some point, really kind of to evaluate what's on the books, because entrepreneurship is so important. They're creating the most net new jobs in our economy, yet we're making it harder on them to start and grow, which is something that we hope will change in the near future. So, Sally, thank you for that question. And I'm available to talk through any of our field guide issues or anything we talked about today at any time.
Thank you, Jason. And now I'm told that I can call on Jessica Harrison. I'm going to need some help here, probably from Matt, to get that figured out.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I was going to let you know that the chat was disabled, so we weren't able to message. If you were wondering why people weren't messaging you, I actually just sent the email. Okay, so I'm going to go read from my email that I just sent. So my question was to Kaim. I hope I pronounced that right. So I wanted to, and I hope I didn't miss it if you said it already. So how did you gather the SMART goals from the community? And did you host focus groups? And if you did, how were the people selected?
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. Devil's always in the details. We were very fortunate. We work closely with the Main Street Group. We have a community and rural development office within GOAD. And so they had done an amazing job of working with select communities across the state using the USDA development curriculum. And so we adopted a portion of that. I've had some deep training in facilitation, and also having worked with Collaborate Up, who were the consensus building facilitators. And so we had license to adopt that curriculum into a half-day series of exercises. I will say that it was amazing to already have Main Street provide an appetite for that level of work. So yes, you could say we ran focus groups, and those were the 7 events that we held, but it was given the culture, I would say, or receptiveness of small businesses in the area to go through that process. And I'm very happy to share that curriculum with you. It was a USDA initiative about 10 years ago, but it still proves very effective. It was a lot of work. I will say that we did need a band of facilitators. We had 5 on hand. But that said, everybody felt enabled and empowered because it was so detailed and they were such actionable experiences. And so our intent is really to return back to those and leverage that enthusiasm, and hopefully not leave too much time between the event and circling back. There is always sort of a matter of leveraging the momentum that you're able to establish in those local communities. I hope I answered the question.
No, that's good because I come from the tech world, and so I just hosted a focus group, but it was internally, and so and I tried to pick a diverse group, and so I'm trying to see how that translates into going out into the community, and so yes, I would definitely love to see that. I sent an email, so would love to connect. Thank you so much, and I'm calling
Terrific,
from
thank
Illinois.
you. Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We have another minute. I'm going to take it just a moment to step back and talk to Steve DeTora about what they're doing in Pennsylvania. Steve, I don't think you mentioned how your new Office of Transformation is going to be aligning and collaborating with your Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. And I was wondering if you could just take 1 minute to mention how you're working with DCED.
Sure. So thank you for that. The 2 offices really work hand in glove. Sorry, I have to exit. Something just popped up, so I have to exit it off there. There we go. So like I said, they really work well together. DCD has been around for much longer than OTO. It was created about a year ago. But the economic development strategy that I had referenced, OTO was very involved in the strategizing behind that. Countless hours and meetings that went into that. They also represent the Commonwealth in the forward facing, in a sense of meeting with companies, taking calls that are then passed along to DCED for further discussion about business relocations or retention. So they really work very well together. Like I said, it's one of those things where the executive director of OTO and the secretary of DCD have a very good working relationship. They're in meetings together very frequently. They have a lot of external meetings together. The governor as well meets with them on a regular basis. They really complement each other very well. So I think 1 year in, I think it's working pretty seamlessly, and the product of that is this economic development strategy that the governor proposed about a month ago. So I appreciate the question. Also apologize, I do have to jump as I have a hard stop at 3:30. So I apologize, but thank you again for the question and the invitation.
So we'll end with that because I'm sure that many folks have a hard stop at 3:30. And thank you for your participation to the audience. Apologies about the chat function, but we will put some links online with the other material that we post, as I mentioned. And thank you again to all of our wonderful speakers. You were just so informative and so much rich detail here. I don't even know where to start with my commentary. So we look forward to doing an update on something like this in the next few months as well, because there's just so much moving so fast. Thank you again. Appreciate everybody here that was on the call, and thank you to the audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank
Sally.
you.
Thank you for having us. Take care.